I want to emphasize something with the discussion of the Midwest Regional Railroad and how important that is, how unique it is to have the DOTs working together for such a long time and to create this master plan that allowed us to be positioned to compete very well for the very limited federal funds that we the fact that we did so well with that is because of that cooperation. And I'm excited that that process is continuing and that there's actually, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, there's a planning process around refreshing that plan. Our next speaker is Derrick James with Amtrak, and my first interactions with Derrick were related to getting bikes on Amtrak trains a long time ago. And because of those initial efforts, we continue to see increased usage of bicycles on trains. Now, whenever I try to call Derrick, it's very likely that he is on a train someplace, either going to or just come back from a key meeting out in the territories, where we like to think that, or we like to say sometimes, perhaps wrongly, that Amtrak is only focused on the Northeast Corridor. And the fact that Derrick is on the train out there all of the time demonstrates that that's not true. And so I'd like to have Derrick talk about a little bit about what's happening in Amtrak. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. Rick and I, our relationship actually goes back probably, oh my gosh, 15, 17 years. We actually met, can everybody hear me? Is this on okay? All right, we actually met, we are fellow cyclists, so we're in a cycling club together. And I'm gonna contradict Rick and then validate what he said with regard to my focuses at Amtrak. We actually wear many hats. It's funny that you mentioned about me sort of being out in the territories. There's kind of an internal joke within Amtrak that anything outside of the Northeast Corridor are the colonies or the territories, because we focus so much effort on that part of the system. But again, to show my chops, I actually am wearing one of these sort of handy, what do you call these little rings? These wristbands. They became popular with Lance Armstrong that said "Live Strong." Well, a couple of weeks ago, actually last week, I was meeting with the mayor of Burlington, Iowa. So I guess you can't get any more colonial than that relative to the Northeast Corridor. But Burlington, Iowa is a very important city to us. Those of you who are fans of railroad history know it was very important in the development of the air brake. The city of Burlington, Iowa has invested almost $1 million. They've cobbled together funds from various sources to rehab their very beautiful and historic mid-century CB&Q depot downtown, which is served by Amtrak. And so wanted to meet with the new mayor there. And I love Burlington. I'm actually a Hawkeye, so spent a lot of time in Iowa. I never have any beef with going there. But he gave me this handy wristband. It says, City of Burlington, Iowa, a great place to live, work, and play. So that's my little plug to a place that you can get to on Amtrak. Also the home of Aldo Leopold, for those of you who are environmentalists. But to contradict Rick, I'm also going to talk about the Northeast Corridor too. I knew that today we were going to have some very capable speakers, people that I have the pleasure to work with, as Tim Hefner at Michigan DOT and Katie England at Indiana DOT will be here today. So they are, as Amtrak has sort of changed its role in the Midwest to one of a contract operator, I think they are more capable of speaking to sort of the vision for passenger rail in their regions. What I want to talk about is the things that Amtrak is doing to prepare ourselves to be a better contract operator, also to reduce our need for congressional appropriations, because as we know, in the very variable Washington budget picture, one day you can be on the ins and the next day you can be on the outs. So we need to position ourselves so that we're less reliant on that funding stream from Washington. So I'll talk a little bit about the NEC. It's been a long morning, so I like to kind of start with a little joke. there was a conservative economics professor who was giving a lecture to his class, and he noticed that it had been going on pretty long, sort of maybe like this morning a little bit, but he noticed that one of his students was falling asleep. So he banged on this desk, and the student woke up from his sleep and said, "Cut taxes, less government spending." So he was prepared for what he just knew what the question might be. So on to things that Amtrak is doing to improve its revenue stream. As you guys know, Acela has been Amtrak's flagship product since December of 2000. All of our services are important, as I mentioned, places like Burlington, Iowa, and St. Paul Union Depot, and Milwaukee, and Lapeer, Michigan, but nonetheless, Amtrak's futuristic look and our 150-mile-per-hour top speeds always draw attention. These services are especially critical. The Acela is because it serves Washington, D.C., where so many decisions about passenger rail policy and funding get made. The service that we operate today uses 20 train sets. Thank you, Mark, for showing that photo of the Acela earlier. And the data that you provided really validates what we understand is what drives ridership and revenue. The lack of growth, though, and the potential for growth on that corridor, we need to try and meet that. The lack of ability for us to grow ridership and revenue on that corridor has been a challenge. Each one of the train sets only seats 304 people, and we only have about 20 train sets, which allows us to offer hourly service between New York and Washington, and service about every 2 hours between New York and Boston. The Acela train sets that we purchased so many years ago is a custom boutique fleet for the U.S. operating in regulatory environment. As the equipment has aged, those 20 train sets, the operating cost has increased as it shares very little commonality with any other equipment internationally. The capacity limits and increasing cost have driven Amtrak to explore market options for replacing those trains. Using changes on the Federal Railroad Administration's Rail Safety Advisory Committee Tier 3 safety requirements, Amtrak had the opportunity to review international designs that were previously considered non-compliant in the U.S. We evaluated multiple bids. Our requirements were, in terms of acquiring new trains, that we would be able to significantly increase capacity within the current sort of operating framework. The existing trip times would need to be matched or improved. The existing amenities on the trains would need to be matched or improved, and the completed equipment would need to meet Buy America requirements. The Acela is essential to the importance of Amtrak. The Acela carries 11% of Amtrak's ridership, yet produces 27% of Amtrak revenue. Still, the lack of inventory, the seats, meant that Amtrak regularly leaves significant portions of our markets unserved. During peak travel times, the Acela sells out. That's why that 11% has stayed steady in terms of ridership, because we don't have any room to grow. The new trains that we're ordering will seat about 400 when they're delivered, which is a third more than the Acela carries today, and we're going to buy 28 train sets, which represents a 40% increase over the number of train sets that we have today. The new trains will offer a flexible configuration and allow us to tailor and augment inventory over time. There are options for us to add up to 3 additional coaches to the train sets, as well as to buy additional train sets. The flexibility means that Amtrak is we were poised to serve significantly greater numbers of riders and improve the travel time on the Northeast Corridor, taking more cars off the road and reducing emissions. And at the same time, it means we can grow revenue significantly. Right now, Acela has a cost recovery ratio of about 2. So for every $1 that we bring in, for every $2 that we bring in, it costs us $1 to operate the train. The new train sets that we're ordering are being financed by a $2.45 billion railroad infrastructure and finance loan. That's the largest loan ever to this point. It also comes with expansions and improvements at the maintenance bases in DC, New York, and Boston, and some concourse improvements at DC and at the proposed station at the Moynihan Station in New York. as well as some reliability and right-of-way upgrades. We're working to increase speeds between Philly and New York, possibly to 165. And I think I have a little video for you. God, there is that. Over 35 years, thank you. That's what happens when you work with really good vendors. Alstom has over 35 years they've built more than 1,100 high-speed trains. There we go. The new trains will be capable of 100 oh boy. All right, thank you. The new trains will be capable of 160 mile per hour maximum speed when delivered, and without modifications, they could reach a maximum speed of 186 if the right-of-way upgrades are made. and that'll be dependent upon us being able to finance those. The trains can be further modified, the existing train sets, to operate up to 220 miles per hour if it ever becomes useful capability on the Northeast Corridor to do that. When delivered, the active anticipative tilt system and single pantograph operation will both permit faster speeds on existing infrastructure. Alstom and Amtrak will partner for technical support and parts supply for 15 years with a second year, 15-year option that's available. As you saw, the new train sets will be fully ADA accessible and have USB plugs at every seat. I think what was the one thing that was noteworthy in the video, it mentioned that they are sourcing suppliers from 30 states. As I travel around the Midwest, that's my territory, is I like to make the point to legislators and policymakers that investments in passenger rail are not just about the operating subsidy, but they're also about investments in American infrastructure and investments in local vendors and suppliers. Amtrak spends more than $1 billion annually on just supplies to actually finance and keep the system operating, many from businesses in your communities. The other things that we're doing at Amtrak to try and to increase our revenue and reduce our reliance upon and our need to go to Congress is we're looking at maximizing the value from the assets that we own. Amtrak, one of the facilities that we own, and we own several large stations in major cities, and I'll touch on 4 of them today. Baltimore is one of them. We're moving aggressively to untap the revenue from the real estate asset that we own there and the adjoining land. There's an image there of the station. Baltimore Penn Station handles about 1 million Amtrak customers a year and 2 million MARC commuter rail customers. You can see there a map of our holdings there in Baltimore. We want to create opportunities to attract capital investment, to redevelop the office space actually above the building and the parcels that are around the building. We think we can generate substantial revenue, and we want to increase private sector interest and support for Amtrak with these projects. We're going through a 3-step solicitation for a master developer here at Baltimore, which first involves an RFI, a request for information, then an RFQ, a request for qualifications, and then an RFP, a request for proposals. 3 teams have been shortlisted during the RFQ process. A development partner will be selected, we expect this summer. And we're also doing near-term state-of-good repair improvements at this facility. This station is on the north side of the downtown of Baltimore and is constructed more than 100 years ago by the Pennsylvania Railroad. The real estate market in Baltimore is improving, and so we'd like to be in on the ground floor of taking advantage of that. Our partners in that development are the Maryland Department of Transportation, the Maryland Transportation Administration, the City of Baltimore, and the Central Baltimore Partnership. The big one among them all is the Farley Station complex up in New York City. That's the busiest station in the Amtrak system, handling, I think, 10 million Amtrak passengers a year, plus multiple millions more of New Jersey Transit passengers and Long Island Railroad, as well as the New York City subway lines that feed in and serve that station. We're in a joint solicitation right now with the Empire State Development Corporation for development concepts, and we're in the process of, and there are bids on the whole Penn Station and Farley Post Office complex. That's actually us repurposing the Farley Post Office, which was across the street from the Penn Station Madison Square Garden complex. Right now, the Amtrak station is below that circular structure in the bottom 2/3. That's the Madison Square Garden complex. That is the site of the demolished Pennsylvania station that was torn down in '63. The same architect constructed the post office, which is across the street, across 7th Avenue, I think that is, from the Madison Square Garden complex. McKim, Mead, and White was the architect, and to expand the capacity that we need to with the anticipated increase in both commuter traffic as the New York economy grows and Acela business as we increase the Acela frequencies. I don't think I commented that with the Acela we want to go to half-hour frequencies between New York City and Washington, D.C., really dropping that sort of measure of time that Mark talked about, the perception of travel time over the corridor, if you only have to wait a half hour for the train versus an hour. Again, Amtrak will expand into the Farley Post Office space, and the light that you see coming out of the building, that's the sort of glass atrium there inside the former post office. That would be the Amtrak portion of the complex. Philadelphia 30th Street Station is there on the west side of the Schuylkill River from downtown Philadelphia. It's the third busiest station in the Amtrak network, with more than 11 million passengers in fiscal year 15, including SEPTA, the Southeast Pennsylvania Transit Authority, and some New Jersey Transit trains. The district plan that's included for that station and the surrounding properties was completed in 2016. An RFP was issued in the fall of that year for a master developer to develop 32,500 square foot tract of land and associated air rights adjacent to the station. Does this have a pointer on it? It does not? All right. Well, if you can see the 30th Street Station is sort of, oh, thank you. That's it. Very good. That's the station right on the other side of the Schuylkill River, and the new development is on our air rights and properties that we own around the complex itself. There's an image of it. Oh, excuse me. There's an image of it in the evening, and you can see in the center of the photo with the brightest street heading into it. That's 30th Street Station. Washington Union Station, the southern bookend for the corridor, is the second busiest Amtrak station in our network, with 37 million people passing through it annually. That's Amtrak passengers as well as commuter rail passengers. The master plan vision was created in 2012. The environmental impact statement process is ongoing for station expansion, including new platforms, tracks, a bus facility, and parking. Near-term improvements advancing with modernization of passenger rail. The concourse will double the size of the concourse. Again, that's the striped lines are all of the development rights that we own. And you can see here, for those of you who have been to Washington, can appreciate how constricting the concourse can be right now. Within the existing footprint, we plan on doubling the size of the concourse to allow for more efficient traffic flow. And to make it more safer, expand circulation, and make it a more pleasurable place for passengers to actually wait and catch a train. The station redesign will, like I said, dramatically improve the waiting and queuing, and will improve the first-class lounge, rationalize an old divided design into a more fluid, coherent space. These projects that we're embarking on, again, are not just about the revenue-enhancing potential, but they're also about improving the customer experience with Amtrak. You know, Tim talked about what's really important to the customers is the experience on the train. Also important is that face of the community and the face of the railroad to the customer. So the experience at the beginning of the trip and at the end of the trip creates a total package, which we know draws customers back again and again. Most important to us and me, those of us in the Midwest, is the hub of Chicago in the Midwest, Chicago Union Station. It is the fourth busiest station in the Amtrak system, handling more than 3 million Amtrak customers a year. You add in all of the Metro customers who use the station as well. This makes the Union Station actually the third busiest railroad station in the country. We are in a three-step solicitation for a master developer to help us redevelop the station and our air rights surrounding it. An RFQ was released in May of 2016. Amtrak selected 4 firms to advance to the RFP, the request for proposal process. The development partner selection is anticipated in this spring, in a couple of months. The goals for the project are to improve circulation and safety, like I mentioned for the other stations, to increase our capacity, the ability to handle customers, as projects in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Illinois and Indiana improve passenger rail service. We expect to see ridership increases, and the station is having difficulty accommodating the customers it has today. We want to continue to enhance that customer experience. and improved connectivity both between trains and with ground services and transit up above. Right now we're advancing near-term improvements. The city is a key partner in this development process. Some of those improvements include redoing the entrance on Canal Street, expanding the entrances out to the Riverside Plaza at Jackson Boulevard and Adams Street, adding new vertical access into the station from the BNSF or southern platforms up to Jackson Boulevard, taking the high-level mail platforms and bringing those into use as passenger platforms. Double whammy there. We get to increase capacity in the station itself, as well as we allows for high-level boarding, which is faster and key to successful high-speed rail services. It will include pedways to the Blue Line station down at Clinton Street, as well as pedway up to Ogilvie and train station ventilation. We hope that this master development plan can, many components of it can be self-funding, and again, we wanted to drive value for Amtrak and increase the customer experience. You can see right here some of the assets that Amtrak has control of. Bottom right would be the head house itself. The station, the initial designer, architect was Daniel Burnham, but it was designed to accommodate as much as 20 additional, or a total of 20 stories. In the upper right is the Amtrak-owned parking garage. And just in front of that, in between the head house and the parking garage, the City of Chicago developed a great sort of bus transfer facility. We have first refusal on air rights for any development that happens on that parcel. And then to the left, you can see there is still a portion of the train shed that has not yet been redeveloped. That is possible for development as well. Again, main partner is the City of Chicago in terms of driving this process forward. I think I see my friend there, Jeff Shriver. The Metro and the RTA and Illinois DOT. Other things, Amtrak, again, we are becoming very entrepreneurial and trying to be aggressive at looking for new opportunities to grow the network. We just came off a very successful completion of the Winter Park Express. We partnered with the state of Colorado, the Union Pacific Railroad, and the owners of a very popular ski resort about 2 hours west of Denver to resume the long tradition of trains to the slopes. The state of Colorado DOT allocated $1.5 million towards construction of a heated platform with controlled sidings immediately adjacent to the ski resort. The ski resort itself contributed enough money for us to complete what was a total $3 million project. The train started in early January. CenturyTel, which is the big phone company out in the western part of the U.S., reached out to us about a very lucrative sponsorship, which added significant dollars to bottom line revenue. This was a profitable venture for Amtrak. We had almost 18,000 customer trips handled on 25 round trips over 12 consecutive weekends. So we look forward to many years of the Winter Park Express, and we are always looking for ways to grow our network and add to the bottom line. And that is all I had, and I would certainly entertain any questions if I'm able and if there's time.
I live in Bloomington, and I've noticed sometimes Amtrak doesn't get through there on time. I was wondering how the rate of reliability has been for Amtrak lately.
On-time performance varies by corridor, and I think relating back to some things that Tim said, we have benefited from a number of things that have improved OTP on the system or affect OTP. The decline in domestic freight travel has helped us greatly. The investments that are being made in the railroad right-of-way have assisted us greatly in terms of improving the OTP. We're not where we need to be. I think touching on some of the things that Mark says, consumers on particular corridors become accustomed to what the OTP or the on-time performance is on a particular route, and they factor that into the decisions that they make. Customers in Milwaukee, where the Hiawatha service has an on-time performance of north of 97%, just are accustomed to the train running on time versus a consumer, say, in Bloomington. And I assume you mean Bloomington, Illinois, not Bloomington, Indiana. That customers take that into consideration. And so reliability is key. And so that is one of the factors. Those are the things that we have to address if we're going to get consumers to continue to look to us as a travel option. Is that reliability? Is the frequency of the service that's there, and what the trip time is relative to other modes that are there. So we're not where we need to be. I would suggest consumers do have available to them on the Amtrak website the ability to look up what the on-time performance is on a particular route. That's a feature that we've added, so folks can sort of go into this with a full understanding of what they can expect. Oh, thank you.
I hope I come across properly. I'm trying to word this question so I'm not antagonistic, but Amtrak often gives the appearance of being antagonistic toward us as advocates.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, they often fail to provide us with good information about true costs of Amtrak service versus what we should be asking our representatives for.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather difficult for us to put the two together without good information.
Mm-hmm.
What is Amtrak doing, or what should they be doing, in your opinion, to help us help you?
That's actually a very good question. We have just undergone a reorganization within Amtrak. Just last September, we got new leadership. Wick Mormon, who was president and CEO of Norfolk Southern Railroad, came to Amtrak. We think he brings with him the sort of attention to excellence that is needed to run an organization that should receive, number one, consumer support, advocacy support, and taxpayer dollars. One of the things that he has done is focused us on, he's added some focus to our relationships with our state partners, where we have honestly been lacking. Again, that sort of internal joke that so much of Amtrak's mental capacity gets consumed by what's happening on the Northeast Corridor. We think that Wick has taken some steps so that we can focus Amtrak's energy on the needs of what happens outside the NEC. We have a new VP of state-supported business development who is spending a lot more time out here visiting with our state customers. And part and parcel of that is making sure that the organization itself is using its resources within itself to provide you the data that you need, be it as advocates or be it as state DOT folks like Tim, or be it members of the legislature. We are in the early stages of that. I accept the lumps respectfully as they were given, because we have not lived up to where we need to be in that area. And keep holding us to it. Let your legislators know. Stay in good contact with your folks at your DOTs. And I commit to trying for us to do a better job at that.
Hi, Derrick. I got a quick question about equipment. So you mentioned about Alstom with the high-speed train sets. I know CAF is working on the single-level fleet for the east for long distance.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting new locomotives here in the Midwest, the Siemens Chargers. But from a passenger riding equipment perspective, what are the opportunities to look at the existing fleet? Is there rebuild opportunities, other things that Amtrak's currently considering? Maybe cycling more equipment through Beach Grove, improving capacity there to improve the ridership experience here in the Midwest.
I never like to be one that punts. I want to be, the services out here in the Midwest, we've had to come to the realization that Amtrak is we have to be responsive to our customers, and in this instance, our customers would be our states. Because of the advocacy and because of the compact that was put together so many years ago, the states were successful in getting a federal grant to actually re-equip the fleet. That acquisition has not gone, I don't think, as anybody has wanted. The states are working with the FRA on trying to come up with a solution to make sure that we can get more equipment. because like you said, like Tim has said, the equipment and the passenger experience on board the train is extremely important. So we are not happy with where we are right now. The states and the feds are working to see what they can do to sort of redirect that funds possibly to another provider. We don't know, but we understand that, we know that it's a critical component that needs to be addressed.
Do you know if there's any consideration being given to when the new Acela equipment arrives, cascading the existing equipment into either NEC services like the regional trains, or this would free up Amfleet equipment used elsewhere, or if it was even possible, I don't know if it's feasible to convert them to diesel propulsion, also to use outside the NEC, which would provide some additional capacity.
My understanding is that the way that the acquisition was structured of the original Acela equipment, that after a certain time it will not be available to us. So that is not in the cards.
So my question is around the redevelopment of stations in the cities that you shared, and I was wondering if you could talk about how that development is coordinated with helping fund or finance the actual station and transportation asset improvements in terms of like value capture and whether there's some coordination there at all.
If I understand the question correctly, Madeline, forgive me. I think that's why it's important in each one of those projects. We have partnerships with local governments because different actors bring different value to the table in terms of what they can deliver. Example here, you talked about value capture. The project that we started at Union Station a few years back, there was actually an attempt to do a redevelopment 15, 20 years or so ago. The city granted us a tax increment financing district. Actually, I'm not sure if that's something that we're considering today. Is that, Jeff, not to put you on the spot, can you help me out on the value capture issue, or you got something that you can add?
All still being negotiated, nothing in terms of that.
Okay. Yeah, so it's something that we're looking at. There are different rules in different cities on how you can incorporate that. Us having the asset, the actual physical asset of the station itself, we want to use we'll use some of the revenue from that to go into sort of our budget pot to kind of help finance some of the development aspects of the station development that involve Metra. We will look to them to sort of tap into the revenue streams, or looking at the legislature in terms of a capital bill to kind of cover some aspects that address things like additional passenger access. So there's a lot of fluidity to it. A lot of it's not totally defined yet, but there's certainly an opportunity there. Sorry if I didn't answer it as best as you would like, but we can follow up about it a little more. There's somebody over there.
Hello, Mr. James. Good seeing you again.
Good morning.
With the pending crisis on long-distance trains, there are two things that I think Amtrak needs to help us out with. One is passenger miles, because I haven't seen the totals lately, but if I recall, long-distance trains represent over 40% of the Amtrak system. When you look at passenger miles rather than passengers. And the other thing is you guys need to, when you talk about locations, 500 locations, you're forgetting all the throughway bus locations. And a lot of those locations are going to go with long distance trains go I'm from Madison, and we probably have the heaviest throughway operation in the whole country. And it's not just Madison, but it's also Rockford. So anyway, we need help in these two areas.
I think you raise a very good point. With regard to the cataloging of the mileage or counts in terms of passengers, whether it be by sure passengers or passenger miles, I assume that you are referring to the arguments that we can use when we're making the case for continued support for the long distance network. Sometimes numbers work, sometimes they don't. Oftentimes we may be dealing with ideological challenges, and we have to tend to and understand the strategy that we need when we're making the case to policymakers on what is of value to them. And often, a lot of times, it's not just about the sheer raw numbers. One of the things, I had a conversation last week with the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. He made a comment about the operating subsidy for passenger trains, but I had to put it to him in context. How 15 years or so ago, the operating support that was needed from Congress for the long distance network was around $900 million. Excuse me, the operating support that was needed for Amtrak was almost $1 billion. And that the operating support needed now was somewhere around $200 million. Yes, some of that is because that's been transitioned to states in terms of them having to pick up the tab. I also talked to him about the number of passengers that the system is carrying today, 31 million people versus 20 million people 12, 13 years ago. And that the number of employees at Amtrak has declined from around 24,000 down to 20,000. So the trend lines are going in the right direction. And I asked him the question, is that something that you want to cut off? If we're moving in the right direction in terms of ridership going up, employee count going down, taxpayer support going down, why would you want to stop that? The other arguments that we use is stories are very important to them. It's important that they understand the value that the services have to folks in their communities, for those who may have mobility challenges, for those who are a little older, for college students. Many colleges depend on us. So the question about passenger miles versus raw miles, yeah, that's out there. It's not the dollars it's not those counts that always matter, it's the stories, and it's how passenger rail actually plays a role in the communities that they represent that really drives it home. We feel that we've been successful in securing and maintaining support on a congressional level for the appropriation and for our support. I think this is evident in the FAST Act, which laid out 5 years of authorizations for Amtrak, and that received bipartisan support. It's very rare that there's a congressional vote on Amtrak alone. Oftentimes we're embedded in other legislation, but when there is, like a few years ago, there was a representative out of California who had proposed a $400 million cut to our budget. So we were able to tally the votes on that particular cut, and we got bipartisan support to keep the funds within Amtrak, and we map out how the congressmen vote. And if you look at a map of the congressional districts across the United States, that map sure does look like an Amtrak map. So the folks who have service vote with us. And so that's why we always remind our colleagues in the Northeast Corridor, you know, we need to make sure we're investing in the network out here, because my colleagues out east aren't going to get the billions of dollars they need to build a new gateway tunnel unless they get support from senators from Montana and Utah and Colorado. So.
We're seeing a reduction in the number of staff stations nationally. I think that makes sense if you're doing a situation where there is perhaps only one train in each direction each day.
Mm-hmm.
But in other situations where there are multiple frequencies, we see a situation now in Michigan where they're not replacing any of the personnel at some of these staff stations where there is a need.
Mm-hmm.
And what this does is it produces a situation where these people are going to get burned out. They work 3 or 4 days in a row on double shifts. So can you comment on that?
We're in the process right now of, we're looking at and doing an analysis of kind of our employee needs in the state of Michigan in terms of staffing at stations in light of the changes in ticketing. The overwhelming majority of our customers no longer go up to a ticket agent to actually purchase tickets any longer. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 7% of ticket sales are through a ticket agent at a station. So yes, we will be moving jobs around so that our employees will be able to have a life outside of work. So that is something that is ongoing right now, and we will be working with our customer, the state of Michigan, in terms of implementing that, so that we have the staff in the places that they need to be, and that our staff can actually. We want to continue to be a place to work where people want to stay and make a career.
One last question.
I can talk, is anyone else? I can talk loudly enough.
And I'll repeat it if you need to.
Well, here you go. You mentioned that ideologically, some folks are going to be opposed to what unfortunately some talk show hosts in southeastern Wisconsin have aggressively called the choo-choo train, and that they will never be swayed. But there, among other conservatives, there may be some rational folks that we talk about the abandonment or the long distance trains always being the whipping boy. Yet all of us in this room, as you as well know, that long distance trains are a series of corridor trains. Something like on the Empire Builder, 8% or something of the total ridership actually literally rides from Chicago to either of the two endpoints.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else uses it somewhere along the line as a corridor train, be it, and particularly during the oil boom a few years ago. Twin Cities, Williston was a very heavily traveled corridor. And I think some, maybe if Amtrak and all of us locally could somehow, to those rational people who object, point out that long distance trains that you can't just, as some have proposed, buy everybody an airline ticket and fly them out to Seattle, that is cheaper than running the Empire Builder. Only about 8% of the people on the Empire Builder out of Chicago are literally going to Seattle or Portland. Most are somewhere corridor travel in between.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think there are ideologues on either side that very few arguments will sway them. But the majority of policymakers are somewhere in the middle. And if you are responsive to them and provide them with the accurate information that they need, and they see the value to their constituents, and the constituents make that value known, those are the folks that have been, that we can sway to our side, all of our sides, because we all believe that we should be running more and better passenger trains. Those are the folks that we can sway to our side, and they come to our side. The Empire Builder is not a route where we have any trouble getting congressional support along the entire route, because those folks see the value of that service. You talk about many of the long distance routes being a series of corridors, and we do try to explain that if you want to develop other routes that are of value that can have market potential in the U.S., the long distance route is a placeholder into the railroad network. We would not have been able to run the Winter Park Express train if the California Zephyr had been discontinued, because Denver Union Station probably wouldn't have any tracks behind it. And that's the case throughout the system, where we have been able to develop corridors. I can remember in my early days of advocacy, those who were opposed to Amtrak said that we should discontinue all trains in the U.S. except the Northeast Corridor. Well, of course, back then, the California corridors hadn't been developed yet. So all the work that was put forth to develop those corridors, California wasn't considered an important place that passenger rail could have some potential. Of course, now those who are opposed to Amtrak, in this budget, said we should keep all the state-supported trains and all the corridor trains, but just get rid of the long-distance network. So as we keep improving the network, the pieces of the network that are the targets keeps getting smaller. So let's keep improving the network so that the whole of it is considered valuable to the United States. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much.